Well, hey there, church. We're continuing our series today on Your Mark, where we're looking at the Apostle Paul's writings related to how following Jesus can be like competing in the Olympic Games. So today we're going to fast forward to the end of Paul's life, and we're going to look at one of his final writings. Now, Paul lived a life of incredible impact. He brought the good news to the Gentile world. He started several churches throughout the whole Mediterranean area. And in 2 Timothy, Paul is writing to his protege, interestingly enough, whose name is Timothy, and he's sharing keys of impact and significance near the end of his life. Now, although the New Testament consists of many letters that Paul writes to the churches, this one is a very personal letter. They include some of his final words where he talks about really how following Jesus isn't always easy. But experiencing his presence and peace in your life, there's nothing that beats it. So one of my favorite verses is found near the end of this letter, and it summarizes how to run your race well. And it's found in 2 Timothy 4:5. And his advice to Timothy is this: but you should keep a clear mind in every situation. Don't be afraid of suffering for the Lord. Work at telling others the good news, and fully carry out the ministry that God has given you. I want to just take the time that we have together to just break down those incredible words that Paul had to say. And the first thing he said was, you should keep a clear mind in every situation. So I want to ask you a question. Would you describe yourself as having a clear mind these days, or is your mind more cluttered? There's a lot of things that vie for our attention these days. You don't have to look far even to see the battles and wars in our world. The Ukraine and Russia, Israel fighting Hamas and Hezbollah. Venezuela has been in the news this week as well. Wherever you find humanity, you find conflict and war. Now, as Christians, Paul writes that our conflicts and wars are not with the people and the things that we see, as much as it is with what we really can't see, the invisible world, and maybe even our inner world. Paul writes in Ephesians 6, he says, we're not fighting against flesh and blood enemies, but against evil rulers and authorities of the unseen world, against mighty powers in this dark world, and against evil spirits in the heavenly places. In order to run your race well, Paul would say that you have to have a clear mind. And part of having a clear mind is knowing who your true enemies are. And guys, it's not people, right? It's not the people around you. It's not the Republicans or the Democrats. It's not your neighbors or the person who's in the car in front of you. It's not the person, if you're watching this, who's sitting next to you. Don't look if they are. It's Satan and his forces of evil. The battle's not fought on fields or streets or even Facebook. The battle's fought in our mind. It's fought in our heart. Now, earlier, Paul writes to another church located in Greece, and they were judging by appearances, by what they saw on the outside. And he goes on to write in 2 Corinthians 10, the weapons we fight with are not weapons of this world. On the contrary, they have divine power to demolish strongholds. Strongholds are those things in our life that really push back against really the invisible kingdom of God, of what we're trying to bring to this world through the teachings and love of Jesus. He goes on to say, we demolish arguments and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God. And here's the important part I want you to see. And we take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ. Why do I say that? And why did Paul say that? Because the battlefield is in the mind. Our thoughts have everything to do with running our race well. So for instance, we think, man, if things were well, then I would be happy. If they're not well, I'm frustrated, I'm angry, I'm disappointed, I'm taking it out on people I love the most. We never want to be people who are dictated by the external circumstances in our life. Or how many times are we in the company of people that we really love, our own families many times, but we're preoccupied in our mind. And we want to move on to be able to go get more done with our work and to accomplish some other things. If I just could get out of here and go over there, then things would be better. Guys, these are the moments in our life where we need to ask God for some help and to not miss the battle, the real battle that's going on, and to have a clear mind. And, so much of today, we just look at the surface of things, don't we? We read the headlines, but we don't read the articles. I mean, we even have a term for it. It's called clickbait, right? It just want you to click on it because the headline is so alluring. We see people as in the way so many times, right? They're obstacles rather than, opportunities for God to richly enhance your life, or even for you to enhance their lives as God uses you to do that. Guys, we need to ask God to help us keep a clear mind in every situation. Our brains many times give us these deceptive messages, usually through just an impulse or an urge from something that's happened to us in the past, or, a fear that comes up when we read something. We have the Holy Spirit of God who lives inside of us, who offers us incredible self-control in these moments. He offers us this ability to not just be impulsive, but to be mindful, to not just see people as wrong or in the way, but to see people as God sees them. And to have a capacity of seeing a problem in your life, not in comparison to yourself, which could be so intimidating, but maybe instead in comparison to God, who is so much greater than the problems you're facing. I mean, what a gift keeping a clear mind in every situation is to the people that you love and to the people that you do life with. What an anxiety and stress reducer this is for us. And so be careful about this. Keep a clear mind in every situation. Well, the second thing that he says here is to not be afraid of suffering for the Lord. We've talked a lot about this already in our series when we say that all of us are running a race at times that we do not want to run. And that's just our way of saying, man, we're facing hard stuff. We're on an uphill slog and, we don't know if we can make it to the top. We're facing immense headwinds where every step is a battle. These are the moments in our life. These are the moments when we're running our race where we're tempted to take some shortcuts, right? It's when following Jesus can be really hard. And Jesus warned us. Sometimes life's going to be really hard. We're going to face even persecution at times in our life. And this reminds me of what Paul wrote again about athletes earlier in this very personal letter to Timothy. He said, similarly, anyone who competes as an athlete does not receive the victor's crown except by competing according to the rules. Guys, when things are not going well, that's when we tend to want to take a shortcut or two. The way of Jesus isn't so much about rule keeping, I want to say that, as much as it's countercultural to much of what we see in our world today. So when others would justify shortcuts, we would show integrity, right? And stay through to the end. Where others would use the excuse that, everybody else is doing it, it's just okay if I do it. We look to Jesus as our model instead of other people. And just like athletes are tempted to maybe skip a workout as they're preparing for a competition, when they do, we realize that they're really just largely cheating themselves, right? So a large theme of this letter addresses that Timothy had to deal with some really difficult things. And one of those was some false teachers who were working against him and against the church. Now, it was on a lot of different levels. Some of it was very theological, and it was really causing a lot of confusion in people. But there was also some of the other concepts of him leading this church at a very young age. Some people just didn't respect him because they felt like he was too young, and what could he bring to the table? You don't have enough experience. You're not good enough. How many times have we heard this in our lives, right? You're just not good enough. Well, last week, we learned that a major temptation that we face is really wrapping our identity around the opinions of others, right? And now even Paul wrestled with the people who harassed him endlessly because of his conversion after the resurrection, that he didn't measure up because he wasn't one of the 12 disciples who walked and talked with Jesus. They were upset with him because he was in jail too much. He's actually writing this letter from jail. And they were like, man, you're in jail all the time. You must be doing something wrong. I go back to the Old Testament. Moses dealt with a lot of insecurity because, worried about the Israelites not wanting to follow him because of when he was young. He had a terrible experience there, did an awful thing, and he ended up running into the wilderness for 40 years. Just wanted to be away from people. Have you ever wanted to do that before? And he wasn't excited at all when God told him to go back to Egypt and to lead his people out. He had zero confidence that anybody would even follow him. And so God had to work really, really deeply in his life for this. Why am I saying all this? Because we all have junk. We can all make excuses for not, right? To not do, to not trust, to not speak, to not step out, or not love, or to not even suffer at times. Yet we all know it's the hard things that teach us so much. It's the difficult times where we really grow the most. And God never wastes a hurt in our life. He always uses it as an opportunity for us to grow. So he tells Timothy, listen, you're going to have to endure hardships. Then the third thing that he says to him is this: work at telling others the good news. And this is what he would say to us today as well. If you want to run your race well, work at telling others the good news about Jesus. Guys, this is living beyond our own selves and our own agenda in the everyday. It's realizing that and living in such a way that God has you where you are, whether you don't like it or whether you love it, you're there to point people to Jesus. Life is more than just your to-do list. It's about people being introduced to Jesus and their loved ones being eternally changed, their lives being eternally changed. So just like yours has. Paul writes about this in another letter in Colossians chapter 1. He says, the same good news that came to you is going out all over the world. It's bearing fruit everywhere by changing lives. Just as it changed your life from the day you first heard it and understood the truth about God's wonderful grace. Guys, aren't you grateful for God's grace in your life? Well, other people would be grateful too if they knew of it. So a good way to measure this in your life, how am I doing with, telling others the good news, is by asking yourself this question: who am I praying for these days that I know needs a relationship with Jesus? Now, if nobody comes to mind, then you're missing out on one of the most important things of running your race well. Another question might be, who are you planning to invite to be here at Fellowship Church? Last week I ran into an FCer at church, and it was a mom and her son, and they were eagerly waiting for friends that they had invited to come to church with them. You could see it on their faces. They were so excited. The excitement on those faces said it all. I mean, they wanted people that they knew to know the good news of Jesus. So when's the last time you invited someone here? I'm not talking about, people becoming projects in our life. That's not normal. That's kind of different. That's not how we should go about talking to the people that we love in our life. People are never projects. People have incredible value. So they are to be befriended and loved and genuinely cared for. And part of genuinely caring for someone is genuinely wondering and sharing with them the fact that Jesus loves them greatly. So how are you thinking about those things these days? This reminds me of a story that my mom and dad told me years ago. Years ago, my mom came to know Jesus by watching a Billy Graham crusade on TV. If you've never seen anything like this, you should YouTube it and see some of the old black and white images of this. Pretty wild. Well, she was watching one of these and ended up saying yes to Jesus. So when my dad came home from work, she told him what had just happened, that she had just said yes to Jesus, and that he needed to do this as well. To which my dad told her, I already did that years ago when I was a teenager. The problem was he just wasn't living the life in front of her. Well, when she heard this, she wasn't relieved. She was livid. She said to him, you were going to let me go live my whole life without Jesus? I thought you loved me. I thought you cared for me. It was not one of my dad's best moments, but this ultimately led them on this incredible journey to years later, eventually founding this church, Fellowship Church, and the rest is history. Guys, lives are being changed everywhere still to this day. So when we're walking close to Jesus, we see people as having incredible value. They need to know Jesus just like we know Jesus. So be intentional at telling the good news to people in your life. That is how you'll run your race well. And then he finally kind of expounds on this by saying, number 4, fully carry out the ministry that God has given you. You know, have you discovered God's purpose in your life? That's a big question these days, purpose and meaning, right? Nobody wants to waste their lives. It reminds me of what Isaiah had said in the book of Isaiah the prophet. He said that at one point he felt like he had labored with no purpose. He said, I've spent my strength in vain and for nothing. You know, we can feel like that sometimes. And you think about your life. You know, some of us, we can run circles around people. We have schedules full, schedules that our calendars are so full. We're on time for meetings, meeting after meeting after meeting. We're hitting our numbers and our quotas. Then, when we have a moment of clarity, we ask, why am I doing all this? Have you ever asked that question? I mean, what's the point? I think it's why during COVID, so many people changed jobs and even their careers. Some moved their families far away and changed their priorities altogether. Now, I would be the first to admit that not all of these decisions were the best decisions in their life, but they assessed what was going on in their life. They didn't like what was going on in their life, and they didn't like where it was headed, so they changed it. And it's why our primary identity needs to be as a loved son or daughter of Jesus. That has to be how we see ourselves. You're here on this planet. You're running your race to make a difference. And so many times we see ourselves incorrectly. We think that we are what our occupation is. And guys, work is important. It matters. God gives us gifts and talents. But you are not only what your occupation is. Some people think I'm just a banker or a clerk or a manager or a medical professional, or I'm a small business owner. Sometimes we define ourselves by the stage of life we're in. Hey, I'm single or married, or I have this amount of kids, or I have no kids, or I'm an empty nester, or I'm retired. You may be those things, but they are not your primary identity. You know, you're not a banker who happens to be a Christian. No, you're a follower of Jesus who works with numbers in business, and you're good at it. You know, but you are first a son of or daughter of Jesus, of God in your life. You know, you might say, I'm an I'm a teacher, an educator, administrator who happens to own a Bible. No, you're a student of Jesus, following him closely, who happens to work with the next generation of students. And you have this incredible opportunity to be light and wisdom to them. Guys, you may not be a pastor of a church, maybe like I am, but you're a minister of Jesus wherever you are. And this brings great purpose to your life. This is why volunteering is so meaningful to people. When you use your gifts and talents and resources for something beyond yourself, it's actually very life-giving. It makes you happy to do this. And when you connect it with Jesus, oh my gosh, there's nothing better than that. So how do you develop a perspective like this? Well, I think practically speaking, one of the best things you could do is get around people who live this way. People who've been around for a while. They've experienced stuff. They've experienced things in life. They've endured some things, and they understand true value of the things in our life and really what's most important. Man, guys, I would just want to call a time out and say this. We have a dynamic group of people in their 60s, 70s, 80s, and beyond, and they have so much to offer us. You know, they're positive about the future. They're in love with Jesus, and they genuinely care for people in our church. I've spoken to them. I've met with them, and this is who they are. So make sure that you're investing in the mission of God, not just the American dream. I mean, fully carry out the ministry that God has given you. Guys, can I say this? That one day, all of us, just like these Olympians stand on these stands and receive their medals, one day we're all going to stand before God. And he's going to reward us for the life that we live. And we want him to say, well done, don't we? Isn't that the best and most important thing in our life? Well done. You have been good. You have been faithful. You have endured the hard things. You have kept the ministry of following me, the life of following me, the most important thing. You've kept clear minds in every situation. Paul ends this letter by telling Timothy that his days are numbered. And sometimes it's good to read stuff like this because it reminds us of our mortality. And he says this in 2 Timothy 4, "The time of my death is near." He knew his days were numbered. "I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race." There he is again, using that language that we're in our series. "And I've remained faithful." And now he says the prize awaits me. The crown of righteousness, he calls it, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will give me on the day of his return. And the prize is not just for me, but it's for all of us who eagerly look forward to his appearing, to Jesus coming back in our life. Guys, we are all running our race, and we are running it for something much bigger than just ourselves and just our agenda. So as Paul shared with Timothy in those final words, he shares with us as well. Run your race well. And I'm rooting for you to do just that. God bless you.